Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is surprisingly a May wrap-up. I didn't think I was going to be able to read any books in May, even though I put out that 16 book ambitious TBR. I graduated in the month of May, moved back home to New York, celebrated my 22nd birthday, and then went to Washington DC in the month of May. So I was not having any hopes of reading. I also thought I would be way too busy to even think about reading. But for some reason, on the tail end of May, I caught a bug, a reading bug, this reading itch. I know we all get it sometimes where we take long stints away from reading and then we just all of a sudden crave reading and stories again, and then we just read for like 24 hours straight. Yeah, that was me. So yeah, today's video, I read 7 books in the month of May and I'll be wrapping them up for you. A lot of them were accidentally very sad books and I didn't think that my month would end up with me bawling by the swimming pool. But yeah, I'm gonna share some of the books that I read with you, so stay tuned. So a lot of the books I actually don't have with me just because I read physical copies of them when I was back in Minnesota for half the month. So the first book that I started the month of May with is Disorientation. So this book is kind of hard to explain. I'm just going to give a quick summary that it follows a 29-year-old PhD student who is trying to wrap up her dissertation. So she's I think extended her dissertation date a lot of times, but she is essentially wants to finish it like this year. So this is just a story about a girl trying to come to terms with like the topic of her dissertation, but I really think it is much more than that. I know that synopsis isn't very interesting to a lot of people. For me, that is like all I need to pick up a book, just because I love character study books and I love books that like don't really have a plot per se, but have a really focus on the character and their motivations and whatever. So this book actually does have a plot. It's actually this whole like mystery story. I saw in another review that it kind of falls into this campus mystery genre, which I wasn't really aware of in the beginning, but now I'm gonna look out for these because this book definitely has an element of mystery that I think if you're wanting to get into stories that are more character driven, but also have just as an exciting plot, I would definitely recommend this book. This book is just disorienting, which is like obviously where the title came from, but I think there are so many aspects of this book that you are kind of asking yourself, is this reality or is this fiction? Like, I'm not really sure, and it almost sounds true enough to be like a real story. There's so much satire in this. If you love satire, I definitely recommend this book. There's just a lot of commentary on politics, on race, on history, on the way history is taught, on academia as well, which I really enjoyed. I don't rate my books anymore, but if I did, I would give this book all the stars. This book was just fantastic. Honestly, it would be my favorite book of the month if I didn't feel more emotional towards the other ones I read this month, but I definitely recommend this one. So the next book I ended up reading was An Arrow to the Moon by Emily X.R. Pan. If you don't know me, you wouldn't know that I absolutely loved Emily X.R. Pan's debut novel, The Astonishing Color of After. That book kind of drives the thesis of my life. Like, it is such an amazing story that has taught me to be a better human being and to be more empathetic and whatever. That book is just so amazing. Definitely check it out. But I went into this book with a little bit too many high hopes. I didn't really think to myself that this was in like an entirely different genre, a genre that I actually don't read much of. I mean, it's fantasy, and fantasy like mythology kind of like storytelling, that kind of thing. It's very different. I would say the writing is definitely beautiful. I like loved it, and I love Emily X.R. Pan's writing, but I think the story just felt a little flat to me. I think the characters felt a little flat to me, like in The Astonishing Color of After. I shouldn't be comparing these books, but it just helps to my thought process of like how I enjoyed a book. But I definitely think her first book was appealing to me just because of how focused it was on developing these two characters of this girl and her mother, whereas this book kind of just fell flat for me. Like, it was, I think it's pitched as a Romeo and Juliet mythology, Chinese mythology retelling, but I just didn't get the vibes of Romeo and Juliet. And also, I'm just so confused lately as to how things are categorized as Romeo and Juliet. Like, is it just if two people, like, you know, can't have each other, like, and their families are feuding? Like, is that Romeo and Juliet, I don't really know. But anyway, this book had really great writing. It basically follows a boy and a girl who are basically like, their stories are like written in the stars. It has to do a lot with like fate and everything, and they have to like save their town. I don't really want to give it away because I feel like the back of the book itself is not very explanatory. It's just very like beautiful language, and I feel like that draws a lot of people in. And I did enjoy this one, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. So I would still recommend it if you liked Emily X. Orpan's first book. I think a lot of readers of her first book will be craving her writing again and her storytelling abilities, but this one just didn't work for me, and I think it was because of the genre and like the subject matter. The next book I read, which you might have seen all over TikTok, I didn't pick up the book because of the hype. I actually picked it up because I was very interested about the premise, but also because I've never heard of this author. But the next book I read was The Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake. I surprised myself with this one. I think this month was definitely one of reading outside of my comfort zones because I do not read dark academia. I do not really like the dark academia like genre or like aesthetic. I'm not really a big fan of it. I'm a very colorful person, and I feel like that genre just doesn't fit my vibe. So I picked this up on a whim just because I've heard so much about it, but also like I'm super curious. And the closest thing I can say that it reminds me of is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. If you've read that, it just had the same vibes. I wouldn't say necessarily the same story. It does take place on like this campus where it's like secret society-ish. So essentially this book follows 6 characters as they are competing to be inducted in this secret society, the Alexandrian Society, that holds a lot of power and knowledge in their world. And this world in general is already steeped so much in magic, so like outside of this society people know about magic, and people know about like they go to school for magic, they go to college for magic. So I really like that aspect of like changing, like it's not like the secret society trying to run like under this like guise of reality where magic doesn't exist. Like magic fully exists and people like know it exists. So it was kind of cool to see that reality shift. But one thing I will say is the writing of this book is phenomenal. Like out of all the books that I read this month, this one definitely had the best writing. Blake's writing is very whip smart, very quippy, very like humorous and witty, and very like honestly like very sexy too, like very steamy. Like I don't know, it's just the build up, the tension is so high in this book. And I really found it interesting that she was able to write 6 characters, but all with super unique and differentiable personalities, that I was not confused at all when we like switched perspective, which was very often. The chapters were often very short and the perspective switched so often between, honestly, more than 6 characters. It switched between other people too. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It actually was a lot slower than I thought it would be. I thought this would be a very fast-paced book just because of the nature of the story. It's like a competition, so like, yeah, they're obviously, but for some reason the writing was like very drawn out and tension building, which I liked, I loved. But this book took me like 2 weeks to read, and I was like, what? This book is actually shorter than a lot of fantasy books, but it took me 2 weeks to read. And when I finished it, I looked back at myself and I was like, wow, I'm glad that book took 2 weeks to read, because I definitely did not want to consume this thing in like less than 24 hours. I think it's better read when you're able to draw out the language and the story and the relationship with these characters, because as you're reading, the relationship that these characters are building with each other grows, and it's so beautiful to see. And I cannot wait for the next book because apparently it's a duology, so very, very excited. So the next book I read this month, I actually have physical copies for. The first one that I read is Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. So this book was a very nice reprieve from a lot of the heavier dark books that I read earlier this month. I read it mostly because I definitely wanted to connect a little bit to my Filipino side. It reminded me a lot of my grandma and some things that she would say that are just like where does she get these things from? But I know it's like a part of her culture, so reading about that was really cool. Also reading about the food, I would say if you're a foodie and you're a food lover, this book is definitely for you. I think it just emphasized food so much and the role it plays in family dynamics in Asian cultures, especially in Filipino culture. There are also recipes in the back if you're interested, and they are really good. I really want to try them. But overall, I didn't enjoy this book as much as I thought I would. It is pitched as a mystery, and for some reason I just wasn't hanging on to that mystery element. Maybe it's just me. It could just be me because I don't read mystery often. So when I pick up a book like this, I'm expecting like really hardcore mystery, but it was kind of just like not that mystery heavy, which I was very confused about because I'm like, okay, where is the mystery? So yeah, this was basically what I thought about this book. And I was also I was very confused because there was a lot of hints of romance, and although romance may not have been the focus of attention, I feel like there were so many hints that a romance was going to happen and it didn't happen, which I'm pretty upset by, but I totally understand if the author didn't intend to make the romance, like, romance doesn't have to be in every book, but I was just very confused. So overall, Arsenic and Adobo I enjoyed, but I didn't love. The next book that I read is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo, and this is a book when you first look at it, you're like, it's not going to be sad, but it actually is quite sad. The ending is quite bittersweet. I think that's the theme with a lot of these books, is just that, like, they're very, like, they look very lighthearted, or they look heavy, but you don't expect to, like, cry after reading it. I cried after reading An Arrow to the Moon because that ending was just very bittersweet as well. I think a lot of these stories that I'm reading this month were about, like, first love. So that makes me cry. That does make me cry. Tragic first love. But Last Night at the Telegraph Club takes place in the 1950s in San Francisco, and it follows this girl named Lily as she is exploring her sexuality. It is a sapphic romance, and yeah, it's a really interesting book that I didn't think I would be attracted to. I'm not a big reader of historical fiction, but like I said, just going a little bit outside my comfort zone. And I read a lot of AAPI books that I just had heard so much good things from that it was kind of hard to ignore, like, the fact that it was popular, and hard to ignore that it was on my shelf and that, like, I should just read it. But anyway, this book I think is a very interesting historical fiction book. I think it's less historical fiction in terms of me, since I'm not very well acquainted with that genre, but I think this one did a really good job of like giving an entryway into historical fiction, because they put, like, the author puts, like, a lot of timelines in the book, so it's like it helps you, and like it's split up into parts, so it helps you kind of chronologically understand everything, because I think the hardest part for me in historical fiction is the chronology of, like, the way a story is set up, if they don't do it, like, in, like, sequential order or whatever. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. The writing was my favorite part, and I think the characters was also a huge standout of this book. The way that Lily was developed and the way that she was kind of used as this projection point to talk about like sexuality in the 1950s in Chinatown, during a time when, like, Chinese immigrants and Chinese people were not very accepted into society, into American society, and immigrants in general. So yeah, I really appreciated this book. I not only received a history lesson, but I also got a really great story with a cute romance, but definitely a bittersweet ending. The next book I read this month was one that's been on my shelf for so long. It is The Infinity Quartz by Akemi Bowman. This book I just picked up on a whim. I don't know what really inspired me to pick up this book. I was just like, okay, I really love the premise of this book. This book follows a girl who is tragically murdered in, like, the first 10 pages. That's not a spoiler, it's in the back. And she ends up going to this afterlife that she finds out is being controlled by AI, artificial intelligence, and she finds that it's being taken over by AI, and in order to save the afterlife, and in order to kind of save people's futures when they die, like going to the afterlife, she must band with this group of rebels who are fighting back against the AI. So that is essentially the plot of this story, and it just, for the longest time, I think this book came out like 2 years ago, for the longest time I was so intrigued by it, just because I think it's the most interesting, like, synopsis, but I haven't read it just because I've heard mixed things. But 10 out of 10, this is my favorite book I read this month, and I know some hardcore sci-fi fantasy fans are probably just, like, booing me in the background. I don't think this is the best book in... If you are looking for a sci-fi book that is super technical with, like, no plot holes and is really well done in terms of world building and magic system, I don't think it's the best in that time, because there was a lot of, like, plot holes and there was a lot of things I was very confused on. But I think the reason why I like this book is because the concepts of, like, afterlife and like the sci-fi concepts that were used in this book were easy enough for an amateur sci-fi reader to understand, so that way I could just focus on enjoying the story and the plot and the characters rather than focusing too much on like the world and how the characters interacted with it. Obviously I know a lot of people have different reading preferences, but that's just how I like to read in general. I don't like to pick too many holes into like the actual magic and science, because even I don't understand that shit. So yeah, this book in general had a really interesting premise, and I think that the author executed it really well. I think it was fun to read in the perspective of someone who is like that like all-powerful person or has a power that like no one else has. I love that. That's my favorite trope, like the chosen one tropes. Oh, I could read those forever. But yeah, I think I love this book mostly is because it reminded me of my favorite movie. Don't judge, it's The Host. I haven't read the book for The Host, but I've watched The Host so many freaking times, and this book just reminded me of that, with like the whole like AI taking over your consciousness and they have to fight against it, and like love saves everything. Like that is just what this book reminded me of, and I loved it. I love when books can remind me of like my favorite things in the world, and yeah, I absolutely love this book. I would definitely say if you have time to check it out. I'm so excited to check out this author's other works because I know that they've written other books. A lot of people have recommended Starfish to me, so I will be picking that up this month. And the final book that I read in the month of May, which was the saddest book that I have ever read up in this point in my life, is You've Reached Sam by Dustin Thao, and this book just hit me in the freaking gut. The synopsis is basically, it follows this girl who loses her boyfriend in a car accident, I think a week before the beginning of the story takes place, and she ends up calling him one day just out of the blue because she misses him, and he actually ends up picking up. So the rest of the story follows them kind of continuing their conversation through the phone, and that's kind of all I want to give. That's pretty much the synopsis I got, and it was like very interesting because I think it dipped its toes into a little bit of realism, into magical realism, which is always my favorite thing when it comes to books, is when there's a little bit of magical realism or something that's just not quite realistic in the book, because it kind of takes you out of like your conceptions and your preconceived notions of a story. But yeah, this book, what can I say? Like, me telling you that synopsis, you obviously know it's gonna be sad, and I knew it was gonna be sad. Like, going into this, I was like, sad book, got it. Like, let me prepare myself. But I don't think I was just ready for the like, you know, amount of grief and that I would feel in this book. And I think especially if you've ever lost someone, I think you'll relate to this on a level that is just so important, and it's the idea of like there's not one way to grieve. I think if this book has any message, it definitely pushes that message of like there's not one right way to grieve. I think this book, it is very interesting because a lot of people are judging the way the main character, who is closest to Sam, they're judging the way she is reacting and the way she's grieving towards him, and it's very interesting to see that. And the book kind of pushes back on that. It does a little pushback where it says like she kind of gains the confidence to tell people why she's grieving this way or understand why she's grieving this way, and she doesn't care what other people think anymore. And I think this book does a really amazing job on that, because I think that's a really lovely message to be spreading, especially in a book so much about grief and loss. I think the reason this book is sad is because it explores the question of what if, and it explores the idea of regret. And I think regret is a very sad thing, especially when it comes to loss, because like you can tattle off a number of things you regret when you lose someone, but I think it's the actual like having a second chance to be able to right those wrongs, or to be able to say something differently that you weren't able to say. I think that's the saddest thing that you can encounter in a book or a movie, and I think this book did that perfectly well, and it was so beautiful. The writing was so gorgeous. I think there is also an aspect of found family in this book where the main character, this girl, kind of reconnects with a lot of the friends of Sam, but also a lot of friends that she's kind of wasn't able to connect with a lot before because she was hanging out with Sam so much. So there is an aspect of like finding that family within like collective grief, and just such a beautiful story. Like, oh my god, if you're looking, I will say though, if you're looking to read a sad book that you want to cry to, like definitely pick up this book. You will 100% cry. I just love this book so much, and I will definitely be talking about it whenever, and I'm so excited to read more of this author's work. Alright, so those are all the books that I read in May. I'm currently sweating just because it is 90 degrees and every time I talk about books I overheat. For some reason my body is just like nervous or anxious about talking about books on camera. But thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to read some books in June and to carry on this itch that I'm feeling with reading books. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you want to hear me talk more about books, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!